Greetings to the congregations of Faith and Hope United Methodist Churches. In these uncertain days, we find new ways to communicate and to share our message and to worship. I have a question to begin with. Have you ever heard of the acronym VUCA? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It's those unexpected circumstances that bring that perfect storm of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Folks, we've been hit by a tsunami of VUCA, the perfect storm of all of that that's caught us off guard. It's interrupted our lives. The unexpected has interrupted us, has interrupted our sense of well-being. Well, in the midst of that, I automatically thought of a character from the Old Testament, the story of Joseph. It sprawls through Genesis chapters 37 through 50, during which Joseph demonstrates a remarkable resilience in the midst of one interruption after another. And I've peered deeply into Joseph's reaction and response to all of those circumstances. And as I've reflected on that, two messages came to my mind that I want to share with you on this Sunday. The first of them is that Joseph seemed to develop a deep trust in the crucible of the uncertain, in the crucible of uncertainty. In the midst of all that came upon him, in the midst of every interruption that he encountered, he was deepening his trust in the Lord. It's an amazing story that's recorded, I think especially for me this day, in Genesis 39. Let me share with you a little bit of that story. The witness of Scripture reminds us that there is not a single person that developed a deep trust in God who did not also go through the crucible of testing, the crucible of the uncertainty. Joseph goes through that testing. He was sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. He rose to the ranks of captain of Potiphar's guard only to be falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, thrown in prison, and then interpreting the dream of one of the Pharaoh's servants, who was then released and forgot Joseph. One interruption after another. And yet Joseph found a way to go through those circumstances. He didn't merely pray that God would remove him or rescue him. He went through them, and he demonstrated to us an astonishing resilience in the midst of that. In fact, through all these times, all this trauma, Joseph seems to grow stronger every step of the way. His trust in God deepens. Joseph found a way to starve his fear and to feed his faith. And I just want to suggest to us, as we are in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic, that that's exactly what we need to do at this point in our lives. To starve our fears and to feed our faith. What does that look like for you? Do everything in your power to feed your faith. In fact, that's why we're sending a succession of emails and video clips. In fact, I encourage you to look at Dustin's Facebook message from Friday night on Psalm 93:3. It's powerful. Don't miss it if you're on Facebook. What does it look like for us to forge a deep faith in God in the midst of these uncertain times? Well, I would suggest it means embracing the uncertainties of life. Faith is trusting God that God will take care of us even when we can't see exactly how he's going to do it. Folks, starve your fears and feed your faith. Develop a deep trust in the living God in the midst of all of these uncertainties. But a second message that came to me is this: that Joseph was able to see the unexpected not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Somehow Joseph didn't see these disruptive changes as something that's going to derail his life, but he saw them as a new opportunity in each step of the way. This is remarkable. He looked for an opportunity in every situation that he encountered. He was sold into slavery. Well, he became captain of Potiphar's guard. He was thrown into prison. Joseph became one of the leaders of all the prisoners, trusted by the prisoner guards. Forgotten, Joseph stays resilient. Released from prison, and he interprets dreams for Pharaoh himself. Well, we can too. How can this surreal and disruptive change that all of us are going through be an opportunity for our church as well as for ourselves? Well, first of all, I think it can awaken us to God afresh and anew. We can wake up spiritually. Prayer can come alive to us once again. Another opportunity is that we can be a light in our community, a light that shines, yes, in the midst of darkness. And then we can demonstrate leadership, much like Joseph did in Genesis. We can demonstrate leadership wherever God places us. Well, it leads me to a question. How did Joseph do all these things? What was the secret of Joseph's resilience and strength in the midst of all that was happening? I think he possessed a secret source of strength. And folks, we immediately think, well, he's a superhero of the Old Testament. Of course he has a super source of strength. But I want to suggest that you challenge that assumption. It's not just for Joseph. That strength is available for you and for me. We've mentioned the fact that one of Joseph's interruptions was the fact that he was unjustly thrown into prison, accused falsely. And he languished there. He could have languished there, but instead of languishing, he thrived. Why? Well, I think it's because he had a special and unexpected visitor in prison. Genesis 39 itself mentions 4 times that the Lord was with Joseph. His divine presence and companionship was the source of his inner strength to contend with the uncertainty that he was encountering every step of his journey. And I believe that same presence, that divine presence, can strengthen us in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic. And so I invite you to experience God's presence afresh and anew in your heart and life. And you'll find a strength that will anchor you and strengthen you and infuse you with the courage to move through these times with faith and even with a sense of peace and joy. There's a great spiritual devotion writer called Francis Fenelon, and he shared something I want to share with you this morning. He said, we sometimes think that we can only experience God's presence in the midst of those quiet times of devotion or worship. He suggests that we can experience God in the midst of the storms of life, in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the VUCA uncertainties that we encounter in life. Allow me to share one of his writings. You think it is spiritually important to have free time to be alone with God, and that's important. But I tell you, you will really get closer to him by embracing the cross in your life. Not always seeking to experience the tender moments in God's presence. When the torrential floods of daily distress sweep you away, just let yourself be carried off without regret. Why? Don't you know that you can find God in the midst of the torrents of life? I just find that amazing. Even in the midst of the uncertainties that we are dealing with in our nation, in our community, in our lives right now, we can experience God's presence even in the torrents of life, even in the storms of life, even in the coronavirus pandemic. God is with us. And so people of faith and people of hope, we too can find God in this circumstance. We can find God in the perfect storm of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so I invite you to join me to devoting time each day to pray one for another, for our community, for our nation, for our world. In fact, I'm going to invite you to a special time of prayer coming this Saturday at 9 a.m. Now, yes, we can't gather for worship, but we can walk. And so I'm going to invite you to join me to prayer walk our Canal Winchester community this Saturday. 9 o'clock, we'll meet at the front steps of Faith Church. I'll pass a prayer guide out, and we can fan out over our central city of Canal Winchester. I invite you to join me in prayer. I also want to take this time to highlight several different things. we have sent or will be sending to you a family prayer altar, worship altar guide. We invite you to create in your own home, whether you live alone or with a family, a prayer altar that can bring to you a sense of God's presence. Along with that, for this Sunday, we've provided a worship guide that is complete with prayers and a song, Precious Lord, Take My Hand, as well as the notes from this message. And so I invite you to be a part of that and use that time tomorrow morning in the very time we would be gathered here in this space to worship. Be on the lookout for future opportunity, future emails and posts that we on Facebook that we can share and that would be a source of encouragement. But please remember, starve your fears, feed your faith, and we can experience God's presence even now, much like Joseph did in his life. God be with you. Amen.